The credits have rolled on the final episode of Ahsoka. Did Dave Filoni save Star Wars? Does Dave Filoni's obsession with Star Wars lore or his favorite character, Ahsoka, did those elements of this show have something important to contribute to our understanding of the shared human experience? We're talking about that and more on today's episode of the Story Geek Show on Orange Grove 55. We have a fantastic panel of folks that are joining us today to discuss Ahsoka, specifically Episode 8, but also just the series as a whole, getting into all of that. And there's been a lot of Ahsoka discussion out there already, so I'm trying to bring some nuance to this one by focusing on a couple different things that you may not have heard people talk about before. So hopefully that's cool. With me today, as always, the Grand Admiral of Orange Grove 55, OG himself. How you doing, OG?
I'm doing fantastic. Really excited to dive into some Ahsoka. We got a special guest on the show today, Evan. First time on the channel. It's good to have you, Evan. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I can't wait to dive in. And again, Jay, as always, thank you for having us on, brother.
Of course, and people can find you on X.
Yeah, you can find me on X at Orange Grove 55. You can also find me now on Instagram, right? I'm all hip now on Instagram. And then you can also find me here, Orange Grove 55 on YouTube.
Perfect. Welcome to the show. And as OG just said, we have Evan with us today. How you doing, Evan?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, this is going to be also my second or third time talking Ahsoka this week as well. I've talked about the season as a whole, episode by episode, on some other podcasts as well. So I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts about this finale, the season as a whole. Dave Filoni as a director and writer. Now that we've seen his first show fully conclude, what do we think of what he's cooking here at Lucasfilm? So I'm excited.
I love it. We're going to get into it. Where can people find you on social media, or if they want to follow you, where they go?
Yeah. I'll turn my eye here in a second. But yeah, you can find me on social media, on Twitter at HarrisEV9. I do a lot of podcasts over on Nathan Rojas's channel. It's a channel we do Star Wars stuff. We do this other show called My Cup of Tea, where we're talking about Marvel random TV shows and movies that we're watching week to week. And then I also have another podcast where we talk Oscar stuff as well. Oscars and Emmys and box office stuff. So I try to cover it all from multiple podcasts.
That's awesome. That's perfect. Go make sure you follow Evan and listen to all the different places where he's talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and we'll link all his socials, the podcast, YouTube, all that good stuff in the description. So make sure you click on those, follow, subscribe, and show Evan some love.
Yeah, perfect. And the host of Citrus Corner. And if you heard the After Dark edition, if you have not heard the After Dark edition, you need to go watch the After Dark edition just to get full George. You got full George on that show. It's perfect.
Yes.
Citrus George, how you doing?
I'm doing good, and if you watch that show, my phrase "going balls to the wall" literally is, now and here forever.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's
very funny. It's very funny. And then and there's some really good stories that George has. George, where can people find you, and what are you up to?
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also check me out on the podcast I'm part of called A Walk with Walt, where we dive into the rich, nostalgic history of the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Walt Disney himself. And of course, you'll find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
There you go.
And I'm looking forward to more of our classic Orange Grove 55 shows. More Citrus Corner shows, Orange Nerd, and then of course I'm really looking forward to talking for our next Story Geeks. We have a really good one planned for all you who are watching, so definitely check that out.
Yeah, and we can say it now. Why hold back anymore? We're going to talk. The next Story Geek show will be all about Pixar and Pixar's ability to tell stories and why they've excelled for so long. Maybe whether or not they're slipping recently, because there's different people who have different opinions on that. We'll get into all of that on the next show. So make sure you're subscribed to Orange Grove 55 so you can check out that show. You can also find me, by the way, at Jay Sherer over on X. So let's get into this. Like I said before, I've talked a lot about Ahsoka already. You can go listen to Nerd Soul and I talk about it. Had a fantastic show where we talked about a lot of that stuff. I've got some different questions today, so we can get into some different aspects of the show now that we're a few days away from it. But we're going to start with just going over some of the same stuff that we go over every time on this show. And that is, what did we all think of episode 8? What would we give it on a scale of 1 to 10? And then how would we rate this series as a whole now that we're done with it? I will start with our special guest, Evan. What do you think, Evan? What would you rate episode 8 on a scale of 1 to 10? And then as a series as a whole, what would you rate the whole series?
It's hard for me because I had some issues with this finale, but I can't lie that I'm not excited for season 2. I think for the finale, I rated a 7 as a 10 out of 10. Then the series as a whole, probably the same thing, 7.5 out of 10. I think my favorite episodes were towards the middle of the series, with episodes 4, 5, and 6, actually. And then 7 and 8, especially last week. I feared some things were happening. I was like, uh-oh, I think this finale has a lot to cover. And then come in this finale, and I'm like, yeah, they didn't cover everything. So I think it left some lingering questions, which is fine. I think some of the arcs and thematic elements that we get into weren't fully satisfied, for me at least. But overall, compared to the other Star Wars shows, actually, I think it's probably the second best. I mean, I think Andor, live action-wise, of course, I think Andor is still the peak of the peak for me. But I think I would put this above like a Mandalorian season 2 and season 3 for me. I do still appreciate and love the first season of Mando. So it's probably up there with that. First outing for Ahsoka. Season 2 might change.
Yeah, and you and I are almost on the identical same page because I feel exactly the same way. The series was about a 7. The only difference between what you just said, I would just repeat everything, except that I did like season 2 of Mandalorian probably better than this season as well. So it would probably be like Andor, season 1, season 2 of Mandalorian, then Ahsoka. The same, like that order for me was probably what I would say. George, what about you? What do you rate this episode? What do you rate this series?
So for the final episode, I have to give it a 5. It's like mid for me. There's certain things that I like about it. I mean, as far as a Star Wars episode compared to other things, as Evan had mentioned, it is good. But I mean, there was a lot in there that I just didn't feel fulfilled, for a final episode that we were all kind of anticipating. It was like, and then the whole series, I'd have to give it like a 6.5. A little bit above half, because it was just like, honestly, like a Star Wars emotional roller coaster. It was like you start out low, then it came up high, then it goes back down low. It was like going through my marriage all over again. It's like I can't. It's like I can't handle it. But it was this. But the finale, it was okay. But I mean, it wasn't nothing that I could say that I feel fulfilled at, and that's how I've been feeling for quite some time with Star Wars. It's like I want to see it succeed. I want more, but they're just not giving it more. Now, as far as how Filoni handles Star Wars, I do love his overall vision of where he wants to take Star Wars. But just right now, I keep on seeing a continuous pattern where it's like they're just kind of just throwing something out there just to rush it, just to get it out. I'd rather take quality over quantity. And I feel like that's how Marvel started, just kind of like throwing stuff out just for the sake of giving it out. But I do know with Star Wars, they have a lot of stuff that's greenlit and then it gets axed too. So it's like,
Sure.
But and we'll go into more detail of like what issues I have with the episode. But yeah, the final episode of 5 and the series as a whole, I'd say like a 6.5.
Would you now, just for out of curiosity's sake, do you think this was better than Kenobi or lower than Kenobi?
Oh, this was still better than Kenobi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so too, but I just want to make sure because my Kenobi score is like 5.5. Yeah. It's like almost to the point where I'd say it's not worth it, but I still like it.
My homemade movies are better than Kenobi.
Wow.
Ooh, Dave Filoni.
Harsh.
Shots fired at Dave Filoni. Yeah.
Harsh.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there in terms of Filoni seems to be doing this thing where he and Evan, you referenced this too, how 4, 5, and 6 were like the peak of this season. Really poor place to peak a season, by the way, is in the middle of it. Unfortunately. But I think that Filoni is doing this thing where he drives me crazy as a storyteller because I feel like he's predominantly a fan. And so as a fan, I get these 10 out of 10 moments and I go, Filoni's awesome. And then as a storyteller, I get these like, 2 to 3 out of 10 moments. I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, this is so confusing. So,
and I do have to add too, what also with 4, 5, and 6, the episodes, that's where it really hit the notion where the story was actually about Ahsoka. That's where the rest of the episodes, honestly, you could have probably changed the show to Sabine, and because that's basically what the rest of the show was about. I rarely got to see Ahsoka at all, like through certain episodes, because it felt like the spotlight was just on her and her journey and how she is adapting, and it's. So 4, 5, and 6 actually that's where it felt like the Ahsoka series to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
OG, what do you think? Let's close it out. You're the cleanup hitter here. What do you got for us?
Here we go. Okay, so this episode, I wasn't super impressed by it. It was okay. It wasn't like the worst thing in the world, but it wasn't spectacular either. So I'm putting it like a 6.5, right?
Yeah, sure, fine, whatever.
6.5. Yeah, it wasn't fantastic. Here's the issue that I have with it is that like Deadline's reporting that season 2 hasn't even been greenlit yet, supposedly, right?
Right.
So why would you leave your show on a cliffhanger if you don't even know if the season 2 is even going to happen? That's a weird call in my opinion, right? Yeah. So maybe they don't know like how it's going to be presented. Like maybe they don't know if it's going to be like another season of Ahsoka, or maybe they'll wrap this story into like whatever Filoni's movie is. Maybe that's what is going on here. But I thought that was kind of strange. The series overall, because I didn't really feel the finale too much, because a lot of these episodes were bangers, like you guys were saying, like the middle, they were super good. But when you end on a kind of a weak note, it kind of sours the whole thing. And this is kind of the issue I had with WandaVision. It's like I was into that show. I was like, this is so creative and cool. But that finale episode was weak to me. So it kind of tainted the whole thing. So for the show itself, I don't know, maybe probably got 7.5, I think, It was good. I had a fun time with it. I think it seems like a lot of setup more than anything. There were some wonky moments in this episode. I don't know. It was weird too, because I think a lot of the choreography in this show has been really good. Like some of the earlier episodes, the fight scenes were really, really badass. But in this one, for some reason, it just felt very like the choreography was off.
Okay, you saw that too? Because that's what I was going to talk about. Because literally the three of them battling the troopers, it felt like where it was too choreographed, where it was like it felt like where you're like counting down like dance moves, like 1 2 3 1 2 3.
It just felt very awkward, like with that moment where the trooper is holding Sabine up by her neck. Everything was like very slow-mo and like, okay, I put my hand here, okay, now you put yours here. That's what it kind of felt like to me. And it sounds like a totally nitpicky like fanboy thing, but I just couldn't unsee it for some reason. And I didn't have that feeling for a lot of the other episodes. So I don't know why this one gave me that vibe. Yeah, just some weird stuff in here, man. Just some weird stuff, And
I'm a bit ignorant at this. Did they green lit season 4 for Mando?
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, because if they already had greenlit for Mando, I wonder if then it's gonna then intertwine the storyline within
the ones they've talked about. So we know that Skeleton Crew is coming.
Right.
We know that Acolyte is coming. The ones they've talked about that haven't necessarily been greenlit are Boba Fett season 2, Book of Boba Fett season 2. They've talked about it.
That doesn't need to happen.
Yeah, exactly. They've talked about a Kenobi season 2. There, the Ewan McGregor's pushing for one.
There's not enough alcohol on this earth.
He wants that paycheck. I admire it. Yeah.
Hey, look, we already know they can save a lot of money by paying George for his home movies. So I assume that we will have more shows between now and the Filoni movie, but just like I talked about last week, I think that they're trying to get to that Filoni movie as fast as possible because they have Lucasfilm is not making any money except off of sales. Like they're not bringing a lot more fans into the subscription base of Disney Plus right now. The Disney show is not bringing in a bunch of new subscribers, which means that every time they pay for a show, that's just eating into their profitability, a thing that they do not want right now because the focus is profitability. So to me, they got to get to profit. The way to get revenue faster is to put things in theaters. They've had a really good success rate with putting things in theaters. So it's going to be interesting to see how many shows we get before the Filoni movie because they're going to for sure want to rush that into production. So,
Jay, you brought it up before, and I think I think you make a really great point where you feel like Lucasfilm doesn't really understand television.
Yeah,
and I'm kind of like on that same page with you because I noticed, and it happened again with Ahsoka, and I saw it a lot with these other shows recently too, where it's like they're real spotty. Right? Like inconsistent, I think is a better word for it. Where it's like you have like these banger episodes, right? And then you have these episodes that are like, what is going on? It's like CW stuff, And it's kind of all over the place. Now we saw that with Book of Boba a lot, and we saw it here a little bit. And it seems to be kind of all over the place. And I think Lucasfilm needs to tighten up that ship a little bit. I think there's a lot of great TV out there, Succession and these various shows like on Netflix and what have you, right? And I think that, I don't know, Disney has the resources to do this. I don't know what is going on there with this particular studio where it's like they just can't seem to get that consistency where each episode feels like the last one. It's not up and down all over the place. It's like this episode's a 10 and this one's a 4.5. It just feels like all over the map with some of these shows.
I would go as far as to say I think it's a Disney thing in general. The Marvel shows, which I love some of them, like I think Loki, I like, and I'm a defender of like Miss Marvel. I love that show as well. But I think other shows are just very inconsistent. They're keeping it at this like weird 6 to 8 episode structure, which I think can work for other shows. Like, I love The Bear on Hulu. That's great. And sometimes that's 8 episodes, 10 episodes, whatever, in less runtime. But for that show, we're getting good character arcs. But for other Marvel and Disney and Lucasfilm shows, character arcs are like very hollow, very like not well written. And they're just really trying to fit this weird 6 to 8 episode structure when if this season definitely needed probably an extra 2 episodes. We're not asking for like 24 episodes. We don't need all that. We just need like a good structure to end an arc in a fulfilling way. Don't leave us cliffhangering for a season 2. It's so unnecessary. Like again, you mentioned Succession. It's my favorite show. I love Succession.
Love it.
Those shows, like for example, no spoilers, but like season 2 ends on a cliffhanger. Yeah. But Kendall gets a good arc. Roman gets a good arc. We feel fulfilled. We're going into the next season happy because a season ended, a season's arc ended, and we can move on to the next season arc. For some reason, like Ahsoka, Mando, other shows, just like the arcs aren't concluded, so we got to theorize for another 2 years. Like, what are we doing here?
It's almost like they kind of take their P's and Q's from film, essentially, like how they did with like the ending of Harry Potter. They did Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Part 2, where they had it as a cliffhanger, but you already automatically knew, okay, there's going to be a Part 2. They did it with Twilight, Part 1, Part 2. Now they're doing it with Mission Impossible, Part 1, Part 2. So it's like that they're kind of incorporating that into a series, but it's like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it. Don't give me that bullshit. Like, just give me a decent ending, and then it's like if it does move into a season 2, then at least you can say at least season 1 was a good season. But if you don't get a season 2, then at least that we can say that we were fulfilled. I don't mind the cliffhangers.
Yeah, I don't mind the cliffhangers as long as it's leading into something that's fulfilling, like with Succession and things like that. I don't necessarily mind that, but when you do a cliffhanger and then it's like, well, we don't even know if we're going to get season 2. It's like, well, what are we doing here?
See, I like cliffhangers like here and there, like because it's like when they constantly give it to you, it's like then you're just automatically expecting it. So it's like so it's like when they come out with another Star Wars series, it's like, okay, we're going to get season 1 by the end. We're going to get a cliffhanger. So is that going to make people not even take interest into watching it?
Tough.
Well, I think Evan nailed it. I mean, you just nailed it, Evan. Like, because people, I saw this comment on Twitter and I thought this is an ignorant person, so I guess I'm not going to bother arguing with them. But they literally said people don't understand cliffhangers, and that's why there's a bunch of people upset about the way that Ahsoka ended. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, everybody understands cliffhangers. Like, cliffhangers are very obvious. They appear all over the place in film and television. But what Evan said nailed it, because you can have certain parts of the plot that you know are going to develop in another season. You can even have certain parts of certain characters' elements that are going to be involved in another season. But there has to be a through line that is consistent that you are leading toward, so that when you end your season, people can go, that was the end of the season, even though there's more coming. Ahsoka didn't do that. Ahsoka just abandoned several of they left more things open than they closed. And so you can't, that's what you can't do. I mean, Evan said it perfectly. In fact, let me transition into this since we're already talking about it.
Sure.
And George, you brought this up earlier too. The show is called Ahsoka. Many of the best moments in the show revolve around Ahsoka. But given that, I mean, do you think that the show gave Ahsoka a good character arc? Why or why not? George, I'll start with you on this one. We'll go around. So no,
I don't. It just feels like that. Again, even how they ended it, just throughout the series, it was like episodes 4, 5, and 6 was leaning the spotlight towards Ahsoka. Then it moves back to Sabine, and then it goes back to Ahsoka. It's like, well, whose series is this? It's like it wasn't giving us enough meat and potatoes for us to actually thoroughly know this character, and that's what kind of pisses me off, because knowing Ahsoka's character from the animated series, I really wanted to know more. I thought, okay, this is going to really flesh out her character arc into knowing more of what's her journey, what is her purpose, and it just feels like that they kind of gave her character the backseat of this series when she should have been in the front seat, because this was supposed to be her show. If you leave the season with asking more questions about the character that the show's supposed to be about, then you kind of missed the mark there.
I think if this show was not called Ahsoka, and if it was maybe a Rebel season 5 in live action, I think that the perception might have been a little different with that.
Exactly.
But when you call it Ahsoka, and it's kind of weak sauce with the character development of her, then you run into problems. If it was Rebel season 5, okay, that's a different conversation, because we got Ezra, we got Sabine, we got the other characters in here that are in the mix. So that might have been one of the bigger issues, was just it's an Ahsoka show that you don't really get much character development from Ahsoka. And the thing is that some of the best stuff for me personally with Ahsoka in this show was kind of her dealing with Anakin. I really like that a lot. But for some reason, do you think that's possibly Lucasfilm's kind of Achilles heel, rather than make these series specifically geared towards, as the title, just based off of one character, right? Because then just call it a title where it is involving many characters. So if the storyline does go off course about talking about another character, it'll make sense. It's like, what's with these titles that it's just like Kenobi, Ahsoka, then it'll probably come out one Ezra. It's just just make a series where it's just involving these characters. That's fair. Yeah, I don't know.
That's totally fair. I think I slightly disagree. I think Ahsoka's arc is fairly decent. It's fairly visible. A lot of it is subtextual. And I said this in episode 5. I think a lot of the Anakin Ahsoka stuff is very subtextual when it didn't really need to be. But I think Ahsoka's arc is all, predominantly about fear, her overcoming the fear from her past, the fear that Anakin, created her to be this great Padawan, but also she trained during a time of galactic Clone Wars, during the war. So she was trained to be a child soldier. She talked about this. She had this idea of death and destruction. I could see the pieces for Filoni where he was going with her arc, where, she has this fear. She has to rise above it. It's fairly simple. But again, it becomes muddled when there's other two different pieces here. And I kind of slightly disagree. Even though it is called Ahsoka, I think for me at least, I've watched 7 seasons of the Clone Wars. I've watched a lot of Rebels. I love Rebels. Rebels is my favorite thing ever.
Yeah.
And I know a lot about Ahsoka. when I came into the show, I was like, okay, here's another Ahsoka show. Let's see it going. And I like her arc, but for me, I was more interested in other characters like Shin and Balin. Even though you named your show Ahsoka, Filoni decided to introduce these new characters that had a lot of interesting possibilities. Especially Shin and Balin. Sabine as well. I think Sabine kind of like is our co-protagonist of this series. So I didn't mind that she was getting a lot of the front in episode 7 and 8. I think she needed to. However, I don't think her arc was handled that well either, unfortunately. I think Ahsoka has 2 arcs in this show. She has her arc internally, which I said was about fear and just with Anakin. I think that was handled decently well with the Anakin caper at the end. But she also had another arc with how she handled Sabine. I think that was a little bit messy because she doesn't see Sabine at all in episode 7. And again, 4, 5, and 6 is all about her. So they had to do a lot of heavy lifting in the finale to kind of conclude her relationship with Sabine and how it progressed. And I think a lot of it was very messy. There was a great line Hu Yang mentioned, like, Ahsoka and Sabine, Ahsoka stopped training Sabine because she was afraid what Sabine might become because of what happened on Mandalore. And I stood up. I'm like, that's great content. Why is Hu Yang telling Ezra this instead of Ahsoka telling Sabine this? Like, there's a great scene that Filoni just like scrapped to have Hu Yang tell Ezra this. Ezra, who has no like super big connection to Ahsoka. I'm just like, just have Ahsoka and Sabine talk about their relationship. And I see this a lot throughout Ahsoka where certain characters just didn't have good, meaningful conversations. And this is what I loved about Andor. I don't want to compare everything to Andor, even though I think Andor is like the best. But like Andor had tons of scenes where 2 characters are just talking and I'm sitting there just eating it up. Eating it up. One of my favorite scenes about Andor is like he comes back to his hometown. I think it's episode like towards the end of the season. And Biggs is upset at him. It takes place at night, and they're just talking about like all the things Andor did. Andor's kind of like, well, I didn't really mess anything up. And she's like, yeah, you ruined this town. And he kind of has to deal with it. And then the finale kind of has him dealing with it and actually making a stand. And in this show, it just refused to have good one-on-one conversations, whether it was Shin and Balin, Ahsoka and Sabine, or even Ezra and Sabine. Ezra's main arc, or Sabine's main arc, had to do with like, man, I couldn't find my best friend in the world. I felt like she was alone in the first couple episodes. And then when she finally finds Ezra, I'm like, okay, we're cooking here. Like, what are we getting with Ezra and Sabine's reunion? And then it's like, hey, cool. It's like, hey, Sabine, how'd you get here? Looks at the camera. Cut scene. I'm like, wait, have a conversation. Like, talk to Ezra about what you've been through, Sabine.
Right.
Ezra, you're one of my favorite Star Wars characters ever. I love Ezra. And we don't get any information about what Ezra's been through. I guess it's just like, I've just been here with the Noti. That's cool, but like psychologically, Ezra, what has been going on in your head here?
Right.
So I think in terms of like arcs and stuff, Ahsoka's arc is fine, but even other characters' arcs weren't really that fulfilled. And again, even though it is called Ahsoka, I would like these other supporting characters to have good arcs. Like, I'm trying to think of another show I watched. Like, I watch a lot of anime. And there's tons of characters like Naruto, for example. The show's called Naruto, but other characters get the arcs. Naruto is just the most prominent. So I'm expecting for Ahsoka, she's going to get the main arc. Other characters should have arcs of their own. And even then, it was just very up and down.
And it's malpractice, too, because I think the casting in this show was really spot on. Like, the gentleman who plays Ezra was really good. I've said it many times on this show. Natasha was great as Sabine. Obviously, Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka, really dope. Like, the casting is great. Like, they did pretty much flawless casting. And then to kind of drop the ball with the character development is kind of sad because I think there's more. I think these particular actors and actresses deserved better. I think they could have. I think they could have done more. Like what Evan was saying, they could have done more with these characters and really flesh them out. You brought up a great point, Evan. What was Ezra? What was in his mind? What was he going through when he was there alone with the turtle people? Like, I dive into that
stuff. Like, again, like I know there's so much the show has to do, but I would contend the animated shows, granted, those have longer, more episodes. They have like, 20, 18, 16 episodes. But I think Star Wars animation knows how to do this very well. Like I'm a huge fan of the Bad Batch season 1 and 2. I'm a huge fan of Clone Wars and Rebels. Those shows know how to create great character arcs for a variety of different characters, while making a season, feel fulfilling. And I don't know why Ezra just didn't get enough stuff. Like, granted, I know there's a season 2 or whatever, but like in season 1, if Ezra's our main goal for one of the characters in Sabine, make his like reunion feel very, reunion-y, fulfilling. Like it feels like, I get it. They want to have the whole like it's a brother and sister, they're catching up, it's cool. I get that, but there's still layers to the characters. It's not just like fun and games. Talk about what's been going on with these characters instead of just making it laugh action scene.
100%.
So,
Yeah.
Filoni
Well said.
probably didn't even know what went on in Ezra's head, so they probably just made the character go.
It also seems like the score. What was it? I think you told me last week, Jay, was Kiner, right? Is it the
That's
gentleman?
correct. Uh-huh.
Man, that dude's the MVP of this whole show.
Yeah,
The score
absolutely.
in this is absolutely
Yeah.
incredible.
easily. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's insane. Like, so where the dialogue and that character interactions maybe fall short, the score kind of does a lot of the heavy lifting, man. I gotta check iTunes and see if some of that's available, because I just fell in love with the music.
I think it is. Because I've been following Kiner ever since the Clone Wars. I'm like, this guy, he needs to score a Star Wars movie eventually, because he's just been phenomenal. I think actually it's the Kiner family. I think he has a whole family in terms of doing the scores and soundtracks. So, yeah, he's phenomenal. Like, I had the same thing with Game of Thrones, where even though I don't love some of the later seasons of Game of Thrones, the scores are always phenomenal.
Yeah.
That really helps out a lot during these scenes, especially episode 5 for this season. There were some great scores going on in the World Between Worlds that I just loved. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, Game of Thrones is a good jumping off point for where I was going to go with the character arcs, because I love what you guys are talking about and totally agree with all of it. And if anybody wants to know a little bit more about character arcs, I highly recommend the book. It's an old school book. It's actually for playwriting, for stage playwriting, but it's called The Art of Dramatic Writing. And it's about, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Leos Agree is basically the name of the guy who wrote this book. And part of the book is all about how you take a character through an arc and what works and what doesn't work in dramatic writing. One of the things that must be done in dramatic writing for an audience to really care about the arc of a character is the character has to go through several stages in the arc, and you can't skip stages, because if you skip stages, the audience goes, there's cognitive dissonance in the audience going, how did you skip? So if you have a character go from being like, mildly annoyed to murdering someone, everyone goes, what happened there? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, what happened? And so one of the things I think happened in this season, and this is where, again, I would go back to the comment where I don't think Star Wars, Lucasfilm, and Kathleen Kennedy has said this, doesn't understand television, except in the context of animation where they have a lot more time, is that they added so many characters into this season that trying to give each one of them an arc that made sense was very difficult. We had to skip over some sections of their arcs. Like, for example, literally Sabine goes from not being able to move a cup on a table to being able to force throw Ezra across a giant chasm. Now, this is not to say some people have said like, oh, people are calling her a Mary Sue because she learned to do this. That doesn't have anything to do with this, right? Like that is a completely separate argument. The argument that's here is we missed that section of her character arc. Right. We didn't get to see her doing some of the little things that allow us to go, oh, I see why she's able to do the larger things. Because let's face it, a Mary Sue is someone that the creator is working out their desires through on screen, and Filoni's not doing that with Sabine. Like, I'm sorry, so it's not where it doesn't work at all. But I think that's what's missing, is that there's not a clear cut case of how someone goes from, like, for example, we could take Shin, for example. We could go, Shin goes from being sort of level to being annoyed, and she's on her way to the dark side. We know what that character arc looks like. They've told us what the character arc looks like. Anger leads to hate, leads to suffering, leads to, like, they told us what the steps are in that kind of character arc. But we see Balin kind of tells us where Shin's at. He goes, well, you have other ambitions that I don't have, because you're going to the dark side and I'm not going to the dark side, so take it easy. We didn't see a lot of that development of her on screen. We saw a little bit of it. But the problem is that they've got so many characters included here that we don't get to see full arcs. And so Well, I agree with you, Evan, that I do think that Ahsoka has a full arc. I don't think we actually got to hit all of the major points as art as maybe articulately, visually as we could have. So when we see Anakin's Force Ghost smile at her, I have lots of questions about this, by the way, because seeing Anakin's Force Ghost like that makes me think it maybe was Anakin's Force Ghost in the World Between Worlds, which then makes no sense to me for a lot of reasons, but that's a whole other show. We're not going to get into that. But seeing him smile at her, what that means to me is she's completed her arc. Okay, good. What can we showcase that Ahsoka has completed her arc? And I think Evan's correct that she had an internal arc of that she needed to let some things go pertaining to would she turn into Anakin, right? In fact, one of the other characters suggests that she could turn into Anakin. Was it Thrawn that suggested that?
Thrawn and Balin both goaded her into thinking about that.
Both of them did it. Yeah. So, and you didn't become me. Great. That's what her internal character arc was. Her external character arc was how well was she going to do with training Sabine? But because we kept leaving her character, I do think that there are some key moments that we could have seen with her that would have made it a little bit more obvious to us as the viewers, and conversations. Great point, Evan. Not a lot of conversations going on here. We could have had some of those things come out a little bit clearer that would have been like, that was satisfying. Instead, we as the audience go, I mean, they got there, but it was not maybe the most satisfying thing we could have seen. And it's true for Ezra, who, by the way, his whole arc is to get back home, and he does, but we didn't see him worried about it. We didn't see the motions he had to go through.
It was so weird. Like I was waiting. Like first of all, I think it was a ballsy, interesting decision to have Ezra get back, but not Ahsoka and Sabine. That was an interesting decision. But yeah, he gets back. He sees Hera, and for all the Rebels fans, I'm like, that's like his mom. Well, they're gonna hug and have a great reunion. He takes off the helmet. They say, "I'm home," and she just stares. I'm like, Filoni, commit to the scene. Like,
yes.
Commit to the scene. Give him a hug. Talk about like just it doesn't have to be long. You know, this is the end of the finale. We'll see them in season 2 or whatever. But just commit to the hug, make it emotional, and also give her the threat of what's coming as well. Because I think that was another thing that was lingering for me. Where I'm like, I predicted in episode 7 that the finale would give Thrawn, like, if you had watched Harry Potter, like in Order of the Phoenix, they're like, he's back. Voldemort's back. It's a big, like, it's a great moment. In this finale, I was like, okay, we've been leading up to the New Republic being very not smart. They're very like, hey, he's not coming back, whatever. And even Mon Mothma's like, are you sure he's coming back, Hera? And she's like, yes, listen to me. And then finally in this finale, Thrawn is back, but nobody knows. I'm like, where's the threat of Thrawn? Like, we're supposed to be scared of this guy coming back. Everybody's like, you risked, like, to Sabine, they're like, you risked the galaxy for one man? Like, Thrawn could really destroy things. And we see him do some stuff in the finale. Okay, cool. But then, like, the threat of the galaxy at large isn't really felt for the audience who has no idea who Thrawn is. Like, we're all fans of Rebels and stuff, some of the books. But, like, if you're just a regular audience person, you're like, okay, Thrawn's back. Should I be scared? I mean,
that's why it's like these series feels like a lot of cut and paste. It feels like that they film like a bunch of stuff and then they hand it off to the editor and they just snip it down to like practically nothing, where it's almost like a montage. So it's like, okay, here's this scene. Okay, so we're just going to kind of give you the gist of it. Okay, now we're going to cut it and then move it to the next scene without even completing the previous scene, so it can so it could have a nice flow. It just feels like we're watching individual scenes that are just like a cut and paste, and it's like we're not really getting the full flesh story out of it, and that's where it hurts the character arc.
And I do think that some of that stuff is happening even because I used to complain about the editing for Star Wars shows, which I do think, George, to your point, is a huge problem. But this is the first show where I thought to myself, you know what? I don't think some of this stuff was in the writing either, because it almost feels like what's being done is the shows are being written so fast that they're like almost writing the next one as they're filming the previous one. I'll give you a key example of what I'm talking about. When they pull out the Sword of Talzin, let's just talk about Morgan's arc for a minute here. What do we know about Morgan's goal? bring Thrawn back. You assume she's going to start working for Thrawn. That's what we all kind of assumed. She sees the witch sisters there. They go, okay, so maybe she's going to join the witch sisters. Maybe that's a part of her arc. Then in the very final episode, they pull out the Sword of Talzin. They give her this dark power of whatever kind, and they say thanks, and then go fight Ahsoka and probably die, because that's probably how this is going to end up. And of course she does. Yeah. Here's the problem with that. Think of how great that moment would have been of her receiving the sword if in the very beginning she said, I'm going after Thrawn because I want to meet the sisters that have been calling to me this whole time. And if I'm able to do what they're calling me to do, they've told me that I will become the next Mother Talzin and I will receive the Sword of Talzin. Now that's a moment. But instead it's like, oh, by the way, here's the Sword of Talzin. Good luck. You know what I mean? You're like, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Now, if I know the lore of that, and if I remember the one episode of the Clone Wars where her sword was actually a thing, which I had to look up, by the way, because I forgot it.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like that to me is not an editing problem, because we had shorter elements of earlier, like episode 3 was a pretty short show. They could have included a few more moments there. To me, that's a writing problem of, I didn't foreshadow this at all, but I'd like to give Morgan a moment before she dies. So here's the moment. And that to me is a person who doesn't have enough time to write the whole show the way they'd like to. So I agree with you, George. It's editing, but I also think it's some of the writing here too.
Which is weird. Like, we kind of know, I mean, we don't know. What do I know? But like, Filoni wasn't really involved with Mando season 3. It was mostly Favreau's stuff there. You can assume Filoni was, cooking Ahsoka season 1 during that time. What's the rush? Like, was it to get it out by October 2023 or something, or July or whatever this came out? I'm like, take your time with these shows. Like, Filoni is beloved in Lucasfilm, beloved. Kathleen loves the guy. So I'm like, she probably given him a season 2. Like, there's a lot of time on your hands, Filoni. Make it, again, worthwhile for your season. You're right, Jay. Like, I didn't even think about, to be honest, Morgan's arc. Didn't really have any. Like, in this finale, when she gets that moment, I'm like, first of all, that's badass. That's a cool moment. Good transformation sequence. I like the visuals of it. But I instantly knew she was dying, right? Like, when that happens, I'm like, oh, damn, she's dead. It's like, okay, yeah, she's going to die. It's going to be cool, and it ended up being pretty cool. But yeah, I was like, I wanted more from Morgan. She was kind of the underdeveloped characters. She was a character I didn't really care for in Mando season 2, but like, she was interesting. She had interesting possibilities. And with the show being focused about like her jailbreak in the beginning, I'm like, okay, she's gonna be working with Thrawn. And I had this issue with other people in association with Thrawn. I'm like, are they gonna think about what their relationship with Thrawn is like? Does the show care to have us ask those questions? Because like, she's very blatantly being used. But I'm like, is she going to have any kind of like thoughts about that? But again, the show lacks conversation. So, every scene with her is just like, Thrawn, what should we do? Like, Ahsoka's escaping. And Thrawn's like, it's all according to plan. Like, okay.
That's exactly it, dude.
So true.
That's it.
It's funny. It's funnier because Thrawn is like supposed to be the super smart guy, but like, he's doing these basic plans where Ahsoka's just like hiding, and Morgan's like, why aren't we chasing after her? Thrawn's like, because she'll lead us to Sabine. And then she's like, oh, okay, you're right. Okay, cool. I'll just vote. It was very weird. But anyways, I'm just like, Morgan could have had some great depth with the witches. Like, the witches are very interesting characters, and now that they're in the known galaxy, I'm like, okay, so we're keeping them around. Hopefully for a reason. Like, hopefully they're gonna have something to do. And the witches did give a look when Thrawn obliterated their temple. They're like, "Oh, dang! I didn't think this was gonna happen." So hopefully they have some kind of like sus around Thrawn. I would really be interested in learning about people going against Thrawn. I even predicted that the Empire themselves, even though we learned in Mando season 3, the Shadow Council is expecting and they're anticipating Thrawn. I don't think they're going to be pretty much excited to see a cargo full of mystical witches or whatever, undead, whatever's in the cargo, when Thrawn returns. And Thrawn also has never been a super pro-Empire guy, given like legends or even the books. So I'm like, there could be a good dichotomy there if Filoni wants to get into it. Probably not. But like, I'm very interested to see what happens there. But again, I didn't get much from Thrawn himself. the main antagonist, arguably for the series.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get much for Thrawn's arc, his threat level at all, because the heroes get back, they do their thing, but I didn't feel a huge threat. I didn't see oh dang, we really got to watch out for Thrawn, even though the show was telling me I should feel that threat through all the Hera scenes. He's coming, he's gonna do all this stuff, and I'm just he came, and he came to Dathomir, but I don't see any threat. Again, it's all set up. Oh, we're gonna go to Dathomir. We get to get our Indiana Jones sequence, which was weird because they had a whole Raiders of the Lost Ark moment. But yeah, so
no, it's true. You never felt the weight of Thrawn in this show at all. The threat of it was very, very surface level. You kind of just shrug and okay.
And I like Lars Mikkelsen. He was phenomenal. Yeah. He's great. I think the voice carries through from this from Rebels so well. I think a lot of the looks he gives, even in this finale, when they invade the turbo lasers, he gives that the wry smile, oh dang, they got me. I like some of that stuff, but overall, I think that's what the show as a whole. Some of the actors go above and beyond what the script, as Jay was saying, was giving them. Especially we fell in love with Ray Stevenson because he was a phenomenal actor. Rest in peace. Yeah. But because we knew as an audience, we're this guy is acting above. He's on a different show. He's acting above and beyond what the script is probably giving him. So even though he's delivering all these cliche lines and Star Warsy lines that we love, he's acting beyond that. That's what made him so captivating as a character.
Yeah. No, rest in peace. He was really the standout. Really, I mean, in this show, I mean, he crushed it. He
was hardly in the last 2 episodes, and he still crushed it. We still like him. We still loved his character. So yeah, it's really disappointing.
Yeah. I have one theory that I want to touch on before we move to the next question real quick. And it's about why everything is moving so fast or perceptively so fast. And here's my theory. Netflix was able to build their empire predominantly because they didn't have a lot of franchises that they were building at the time. They were just acquiring content, and then all of their original content. You'll notice that very few Netflix series go past 2 seasons. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's contractual. Some of it's just that the viewership drops off, all that kind of stuff. You don't get the biggest bang for your buck about announcing a new show if it's just a show that's coming back. Of course, there's breakouts like Stranger Things that break the rule. But my point is that Netflix built this whole empire without having to worry about a lot of franchises. The difference is when Disney launched their service, they were launching that service based on 3 different things predominantly. The vault of Disney stuff that you could gain access to, which is in and of itself a pretty valuable vault of stuff.
Yeah.
But also based off of getting Star Wars shows out and Marvel shows out as quickly as possible. And those were important because, you could subscribe for the vault, but if you watch a few of the movies, you might go, you know what? I've watched all the movies that I want to watch for another year, so I'm just going to unsubscribe. So they needed something that was going to keep people on the service week after week, which is new content. They're going to have new content where they release a show a week. And you'll notice that they've timed all of their releases so that there's only maybe a week or 2 in between series. And they didn't even do that this time because they just launched Loki. So they just ended Ahsoka, launched Loki. And I think they're doing that because they don't want to have the subscriber numbers tank. Because I'll be honest, I'm being completely honest here. As much as I like Disney Plus, I don't like it enough to keep it when Loki's over. There's nothing after that. We know that there are strikes. They're not doing anything new post Loki. I'm out. I'm canceling, right?
So what you're saying, Jay, is you're not a big Swiss Family Robinson guy? What's going on, dude?
No, it's not my jam. I know I'm going to subscribe. That's the other thing. I know I'm going to subscribe in the future as soon as the stuff comes back, and then I have access to the whole vault again. So I think that part of the problem that Marvel and Star Wars have had, Lucasfilm and Marvel, is that the speed at which they need to produce content means that they're having to rely on a lot of the same people. They don't have a lot of, they're spending a lot of money on these shows already. They're not spending a lot of money to go after big name directors and stuff. The only show that I think that has had enough time, they've gotten lucky in some other cases, but the only show that I think that has been lucky enough to have the most amount of time is Andor was announced years before Kenobi was even thought of. And then Kenobi, they said, oh, by the way, we're also doing a Kenobi, and Kenobi came out in 6 months. And Andor, the quality of Andor showcases that that team had a lot of time on their hands to create that show. I don't think the other creators have had that luxury. So anytime I complain about Star Wars, which has been most of this week because I was pretty disappointed in the finale, I'm not complaining and saying like Dave Filoni doesn't know what he's doing or Jon Favreau doesn't know what he's doing. I think in my mind, these creators have a lot of stress on their hands and they're trying to get these shows out the door. I would have liked to see Dave Filoni, for example, direct a few more of these. I was pretty shocked that he didn't, to be honest with you. I would have thought he would have been directing the finale because it's his baby, but he didn't. And I thought Rick did a pretty good job of directing this final episode, and he's one of their best Star Wars directors they've got. But man, I think Disney's putting too much pressure on Lucasfilm and Marvel to maintain their subscriber base. And I'm not sure that that's a good call long-term in terms of quality content.
Well, yeah, and Bob Iger has said that in like these shareholder meetings and stuff, where he said, we understand we were kind of like this, we were just trying to like churn this stuff out, rapid fire, right? And he said that we're going to focus now on having the gaps a little wider between these things, and we're going to focus on the quality. And I think that's the right decision. Yeah. You really got to take a step back, take a breath, and really get this stuff right. Marvel is kind of, it's not in a good place right now. Star Wars. I mean, look, for all the issues that Star Wars has on TV or whatever, I still think it's had a stronger showing than Marvel, to be honest. Like, way stronger, in my opinion. But I think that this approach that Iger is talking about, where we're going to step back, focus on quality. You're not going to get as many shows per year, but what the stuff you do get will be better. That's absolutely the right move, and it touches upon kind of what you were saying, Jay, because I think maybe they are these creators. Very talented, very smart, capable people, but maybe they're a little too like under the gun to get this stuff out there, and it shows,
Yeah. I'm with you guys. I think it's very much like they want to focus on these franchises, and for Disney Plus, I always said this: you can't just focus on Star Wars and Marvel because I love those as fans of Star Wars and Marvel. I'll always watch those, but it would be great if you could do some originals like. You mentioned, Jay, like Netflix, started off with not doing too many originals, but like they got their base with House of Cards, and then it grew with other shows as well. So I think Disney Plus needs to develop some good originals, give time for Star Wars and Marvel to cook, do some good things. I loved personally Willow from last year. I was very disappointed that got canceled, but like there's shows like that you could have just had that be an original series. Bring in some new subscribers while you give Star Wars and Marvel time to breathe and release again, quality over quantity. And then you can bring other people back. Like make it a two-hand thing. You don't have to rely on all these franchises, but if you are, take your time with them. I think that's what Iger's feeling.
I think that what Disney's play needs to be in regards to that too is to actually lean on Hulu a little bit more, combine the two a little bit more, and rely on, because Hulu as an aggregator, you can always buy content, which is what Netflix can do all the time. Now we've got, Suits is blowing up like crazy because they bought it. You know what I mean? Like, but it's like, so Disney needs the option to be able to do that, and they can do that through Hulu. It's a little bit more difficult for them to do that through Disney Plus because they've purported that is the original kind of, all of our original stuff is coming out of, our branded stuff is coming out of there. I know that they have some stuff that's not branded, but for the most part. Let's move on to this other question. This is probably the deepest question that I got on here, and then we'll end with one other question that's a little bit lighter. And I'll start with you, George, because I haven't heard from you in a while, and I know, and I got to get a balls to the walls take here. We all need a little escapism now and then. Star Wars has provided a lot of escapism, but also Star Wars has had some pretty meaningful messages that it's put out into the world as well. And I always prefer a story that can move me or cause me to think differently about a topic. So, George, in what ways, if any, did Ahsoka offer commentary on the human experience?
Honestly, it was actually my favorite episodes, which was 4, 5, and 6. It was like, that was like the core of the season, where it was basically her relationship with her master, with Anakin, because it was all about that sense of learning and teaching and trying to understand where where she is moving from going back into her past. And I think that is very relatable as us as humans, because we go through that in life. So to kind of take that human kind of quality and put it into these fictional characters in this fictional storyline, I feel like that's where a lot of people can have that connection with Ahsoka as the character itself, and also carry throughout the storyline. So I feel like that was like the moment, because really, honestly, 4, 5, and 6, that's what basically made the series for me. If it really wasn't for those, the whole series probably would have got a 2 for me, to be honest with you, because it really showcased the emotion of that these characters are real. And it's actually kind of not kind of going off of Star Wars, but honestly, where John Lasseter kind of said it best. It was like having that montage in Toy Story 2, where it was like what happened with Jesse with the ballad, and it's like, and he says when you watch that emotion, between these characters, it's like, this is more than just computer data. This is more than just CGI. These characters are alive and they're real. Well, in this moment, that's where it kind of is with these characters. It's like you're watching it, but it's like it's very relatable depending on like what you could be going in through your own personal life. So you have this character where it may not come out and tell you like straightforward, hey, you need to do this or you need to go here. It's like, but it's like it's a way of teaching and learning between the master and the apprentice. And it was just them two alone with Anakin and Ahsoka, their interconnection of how they relay off of one another and how they kind of feed off of one another. That to me, I thought was the best part of the series.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. By the way, Toy Story 2 is my favorite Toy Story. I love Toy Story 2.
Nice.
Toy Story 2 is great. Yeah, I have a hard time choosing between 1, 2, and 3 because I feel like they're all so. I mean, I even like 4, but yeah, that's a really good point. What do you think, OG? What was the commentary? What kind of commentary did Ahsoka offer on the human experience?
I think there's kind of two. Like I said before, I think the Anakin Ahsoka stuff was really great. I really like that. I think it's kind of like the human message is kind of like maybe dealing with your past, kind of figuring that out. I like that. I think that whenever you have the Rebels crew together, I think that also the messaging automatically becomes like family. Maybe not necessarily family like in the blood sense, but like the family that, like the people really close to you. They're not blood necessarily, but they're family, right? And I think that might be a message here with this, where it wasn't executed the best. We talked about that, but I think overall, I think that people kind of get that idea of the importance of those relationships in your life, having each other's backs. I think that was really strong. I think that's kind of what this show was about, in my opinion. Those two things, Ahsoka dealing with Anakin, her past, how that might affect her future, and her relationships with like Ezra and Sabine, and that kind of family dynamic. So, and that's cool. And that's very Star Wars. I mean, that's Star Wars is all about relationships. It really is. And so I really dug that about this show. So the messaging was pretty good. I think that some of it could have been executed better, but yeah, overall, it's kind of where I stand with it.
Okay. Evan, what do you think?
I'm with you guys. I think the messaging was very solid. I think it could have had some more depth. But one of my favorite Star Wars movies is The Last Jedi, and it's a very similar arc that Kylo goes through in terms of like on a dark side level. Kylo is too beholden to the past and what happened to him in the past, and he goes down a very dark path. Ahsoka was close; she was on the edge. She doesn't go full dark side, but as Filoni shows us, she was also beholden to the past, and she nearly gave in to that fear. She doesn't want to have that fear of like weakness, that fear of like what happened to her in the past, and she wants to grow beyond that. And I think that's a very good commentary. Don't become beholden to your past, because it could affect your current relationships. And as the show showed us, like it could affect her relationship with Sabine. So I think overall, like Filoni nails a master and apprentice, that sensei relationship that is prevalent throughout all of Star Wars. Again, I mentioned The Last Jedi, but also like in the original trilogy, how Luke handles like his masters in Yoda and Obi-Wan, like what he should learn from them. And it's a good commentary, like what you should take away from those that are above you, whether it's your parents or some older friends you might have. Like, don't let the sins of the past begrudge you because it could affect your current relationships and your current future. Allow yourself to live, acknowledge what happened in the past, learn from those mistakes, and use what you've learned to craft some better, more fulfilling relationships in the future and the present. I think Filoni kind of like loves talking about that stuff because, like you mentioned, Orange, that's very much what happens with Rebels. That's a very prevalent Rebels theme where Kanan is very much like, that's one of his arcs too, where he's like trying to grow, and Hera's always there with him, like giving him confidence to like create these lasting relationships, like he does with Ezra by the end of the season or series. So I think it's a very prevalent commentary, and I like how Filoni tackles it here.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I agree with you guys. I have a couple issues that maybe you guys haven't expressed yet. The issue for Ahsoka and her identity and who she is and who she will become, both as a master and apprentice, I think is handled decently. I think, if we gave the same question to the writers of Andor and gave them the amount of time they had on Andor to do it, I think we would have gotten something a little bit more powerful out of it. But I think it's there. I think Sabine's identity and her issues about identity are a little bit less. They're there and they get attention, but it doesn't feel like we get as far as I wish we would have gotten. And I think, to your point, Evan, about like how there's not conversations, we don't hear how these people are thinking. I think that's a major part of it. I mean, every time it comes up that Ezra is like, well, we get to leave now, right? And every time that Sabine goes, let's not talk about that right now, you're like,
that killed me. That killed me. I'm like, it was 2 episodes in a row. I'm like, what are you possibly hiding from Ezra? You went across the galaxy to save him, and now you're gonna be like, that's a story for another time. And then so I'm like, okay, I'll wait. Finale comes. The very first scene is you see Ezra fixing his lightsaber because you assume Sabine told him already off screen. Yeah. I'm like just tell us.
It's crazy.
I'm telling you, cut and paste. It's
exactly. So I think that like you had Sabine was about identity. It was okay. Ahsoka was about identity. It was good. Shin was about identity and didn't get enough there. We didn't get enough there. Like, we don't really even know what was going on there. Baylan was about philosophy because we wanted to understand why was he doing this and why did he think everything needed to start over again and what prompted him to think some of those things. Didn't really get enough of that either. We may get more of it in the future.
We got so close. I think some of the best stuff in episode 6 was like, in Ahsoka and Baylan had a parallel arcs. I called this out in episode 2, at the end of episode 2. I'm like, Baylan and Ahsoka are both masters. They're going to have parallel arcs, hopefully, throughout the season. It didn't end up happening because what happened to Baylan. But, like, I assumed by episode 6, I'm like, Baylan and Ahsoka are both dealing with fear. They both had to live through Order 66. We don't know much about Baylan's experience there, but we know about Ahsoka's. And Ahsoka was dealing with fear. Baylan talked about how he loved being in the Jedi Order, but it was like it was fleeting. And I think a lot of it, this is subtextual for me at least. I'm thinking maybe he had this idea of fear, powerlessness. That's why he wants to break the wheel, so he doesn't have to go back to that painful memory again, assumingly so. And that's why he wants to create this power, this everlasting power, so that he doesn't have to experience that feeling of helplessness again. And that's why he wants to create a new beginning, a new sense of power. Unfortunately, that stuff is there a little bit in episode 6, but there's only so many times you can keep saying that there's a new beginning. Break the wheel. I'm like, so I speculate in episode 6. I speculate in episode 7. Episode 8 comes around. He's in front of the Mortis statues. I'm tired of speculating.
Yes.
Like, now we have to wait 2 years at least to see what happens with this, and it's not going to be with Rey.
I know.
It's disappointing.
It's heartbreaking.
That's a really, I think one of the points that you brought up that I absolutely love is that Ahsoka and Baylan do have these shared things that they're struggling with, right? We know that Ahsoka has already isolated herself from a lot of people around. Like she doesn't fully embrace any partnership with Luke. She's not around for Sabine. She's not around for the Republic, really. She's kind of doing her own thing. She's in isolation. Balin is kind of doing the same thing. He's also in isolation. And what you want to see at the very end is you want to see the family get back together, and that's the correct route. So that because people should not stay in isolation. We all know this as a human experience. It's not good for people to be in isolation. And so what we want to be very clear is leaning into your family or your adopted family, as you were saying, OG, as opposed to doing what Balin is doing, which is going full isolation and getting away from his apprentice. We don't want that, because that leads to what Balin's about to do, which is probably bad, right? And I think that those points, because then the other thing I was going to say was the Ezra is the family point, and I think Hera is as well. And you brought that up, Evan. Like at the end, like that's especially when Ezra and Ezra missed 2 hugs. Ezra needs 2 hugs that he did not get, and I am pissed about it. Because his arc is about family and recovering that family. And Ahsoka is helping that family come back together, but we don't hit the points very hard of how important that is. And so it still seems like there's some isolation because these characters aren't fully empathizing and embracing one another. We're not getting the conversations, like you said. They're not touching each other like we thought. It's ending in a kind of a weird way where they're family, but they still feel isolated in their little their little pods or whatever. So it's a little bit weird. So I think there was some depth here. I think that there's more depth to be mined out of it. But I think what you did, Evan, is actually like what a lot of people would do if they were looking for depth and not escapism, which is you have to go search for it and then place it in the story as opposed to the story being able to provide it to you. So I'm glad you did that, because I like these kind of conversations. But I wish the show would have gone a little bit deeper into it.
I say this all the time on my other podcast. I'm like, I think I'm doing too much for these shows. I think Mandalorian, I think Favreau talks about this, but Favreau is a huge fan of like the human experience and the human arcs and how to create like those mythological hero journeys, those Joseph Campbell stuff. Favreau's a huge fan of that stuff. And I can see it in Mando, even as weak as Mando season 3 is for me. I can see the hero's journey per se a little bit, but it doesn't feel interesting because it's just like a Cliff Notes thing there, and they try and end it, and it's just like, okay, that was it. But like same thing for Ahsoka now. I'm like, I see where you're going, Filoni. It's just that I don't think it's fully there. And you brought something up there, Jay, where this is especially true with Shin and Balin, where Balin, as you said, goes around this other path and leaves Shin. And I'm like, okay, this is a master and apprentice relationship, but Shin has no words to Balin. I'm like, Shin, your master told you to go fight Ahsoka and Ezra on a suicide mission? I'm like, how do you feel about that? And he's just like, I'll just go down there, I'll radio in Thrawn, I'll go down there and get my ass kicked, and I'll walk away.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you feel about that? What's the emotion there? Is there anything going through your head, Shin? And then they try to cliffhanger me with Shin in the finale, raising a saber to these marauders, and I have no clue how I'm supposed to feel. I'm like, is she supposed to be like, I'm going to take over you? Maybe. I guess that's what Balin taught her, but like, what does she think about this? Are Balin and her going to reunite? How does she feel about Balin? Are these questions the writers care about? Like, am I thinking too much for this show?
Well, and Evan, it really plays to what you've been saying the whole time, where there's no dialogue in this. There's no conversations.
None.
And that would make all the difference in stuff in that situation, you know?
It's not hard. The animated shows, which are for children, and George says it's for children, but it's for everybody. But I'm like, these animated shows nail that. There's some great scenes in Bad Batch Season 2 where it's just like Tech and Omega talking, and I love it. I love it. Even in Rebels, it's just like Ezra and Kanan just talking about like the Force, what it means for them. I'm like, I love that. And that's in a 21-minute show. We can't do that in Ahsoka, which is twice that long. That's like, it's astonishing for me.
Yeah, it's a really good point. All right, I'm going to pull us up out of this depth, and I just want to get we'll end the show after we talk about this.
Sure.
What do you think are some of the strongest and or weakest elements in Ahsoka? That can be. This is like an open-ended question. Anything you want to talk about, OG? Where is it the strongest? Where is it the weakest?
Okay, so strongest. I'll start with strongest. The music was the absolute MVP for me. Every episode, he absolutely crushes it. I love the score. Ray Stevenson. I mean, obviously, he crushed it in that role as Balin. I'm heartbroken that we're not going to see more of his character. He was just fantastic. The casting overall, I think, was really strong. You know, like I said many times, I think Sabine was perfect. I think, obviously, Rosario Dawson, she's fantastic as Ahsoka. Ezra was great. You know, they're all believable, like in terms of like, okay, I could see these being the characters that we see from the animated show, and that's what all I really wanted. And they did a good job. They did a good job for what they were given, right? I love the Anakin stuff. I'm a fan of the prequels. I like the prequels. I like seeing Hayden in there. Hayden got a lot of shit. And when those prequels came out, he got so much shit, and I'm really glad he's back and he's getting some love again. So that's awesome to see. I think it was just kind of cool overall to see the Rebels crew again. You know, that was fun. You know, so that's kind of my pros. The cons, we've kind of touched upon them here. You know, it's a very kind of like, it feels very surface level. They didn't go deep enough. They didn't really wrap up enough for me at the end. It was too many open-ended questions, like that thing with Shin and the Marauders. I'm like, what is that? What's going on? It's weird stuff, you know? Yeah. So that's kind of like the negatives. It's more about like, just kind of like they didn't flesh things out enough. They didn't go deep enough for this, for this. And to George's point, it feels very edited. You know what I'm saying? So that's a problem. And that's the thing too. It's like, okay, for Star Wars, when you have only 8 episodes, and this goes for the Marvel stuff too, but when you only have 8 episodes, each episode matters more. So when you have a show like Rebels and you have a 20 episode season, you can get away with a filler episode here or there that doesn't really matter or whatever. When you only got 8, you got to do Succession level quality each time. Yeah, you have to hit that home run pretty much every single time, because if you miss one, it's like that cuts into the, you know, you only have 8. I mean, you miss 1 or 2 and you mess up the whole season. So that's an issue, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. Again, it wasn't a terrible show. I actually had a lot of fun with it. It's just that it was a very flawed show. And I think Lucasfilm, and like to Evan's point, Disney in general, they need to figure these shows out better. There's something going on in this creative process. The executives are meddling, or there's some kind of directive. I don't know what it is. They need to figure that out and kind of get more this content a little stronger. And hopefully, with Bob Iger saying he's going to spend a little more time on this stuff, that gets fixed. So
that's great. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that stuff. Evan, what do you think? What are some of the best moments? What are some of the weakest?
I'll start with the cons. I want to continue what Orange was saying there, where I think like I'm on two sides of it. I think Disney, first of all, thinks of these shows as like 8 or 10-part movies, which, you know, television is way different from movies. I don't think they nailed what a television season is supposed to encapsulate. So they're thinking of it as like, okay, this is part of a movie, and then the ending will lead us into the second part of the movie. It's like, no, like we need a TV show. But also Mando is also very much like sometimes it's like episode of the week kind of thing where they don't really connect. So I don't think they found a good balance there overall. And again, other weaknesses is just depth and conversations and having those emotional moments hit deeper. Because they know, Filoni knows how to do this. Rebels has it in spades. Clone Wars has it in spades, even though Clone Wars is more so of a like battle of the week, sometimes 3 battles, and then they move on to the next planet kind of thing. There's still a good resonant arc from beginning to end with the Ahsoka and Anakin and even Obi-Wan's trio relationship there that grows from season to season. For Ahsoka, I feel like there needs to be some kind of depth. And I think season 2 can really, if they hit the ground running right, I think it can fix a lot of the problems that I've had. I think Ahsoka's arc is pretty much, for the first season at least, pretty much done. So I'll be interested to see what Ahsoka's arc could be in a season 2. Now that her and Sabine are on steady ground for now. Balin and Shin have infinite possibilities. Those characters I attach to so well because they're very fascinating, very interesting, but I just wanted to learn more. So I think season 2 can really hit the ground running on those. What else here? I think some of the direction still needs some work from a lot of these shows. Certain episodes were great. I think episode 5. I think Filoni did episode 5, I believe. Maybe he did. I'm not sure. But that was one of the most well-directed episodes of the season for me, that World Between Worlds episode. I think that was pretty solid. Episode 4 as well. So yeah, I think some of the direction and definitely the writing. I think just nail those character dynamics, those character interactions, make it a bit more meaningful. But on the pros, I think I agree with everything Warren said. The casting was spot on. I'm a huge Mary Elizabeth Winstead fan. Love her. She's one of my favorites. Sky High. I loved her ever since Sky High. She's great. I think she was solid as Hera. I think she also needed some more development, but she wasn't meant to be part of the show as a whole, so I was fine. I don't have too many complaints there because she couldn't do much anyways. But overall, I think I enjoyed the casting. I think Natasha and Ray Stevenson are probably the biggest standouts for me. And then, yeah, some of the action. We talked about it a little bit here, but I actually enjoyed some of the action in this finale. I actually enjoyed some of the Ahsoka versus Morgan fight. That was fine. The Stormtrooper stuff was, here and there. Right. But I think the Ahsoka and Morgan fight was solid. In episode 4, especially, the Ahsoka versus Balin fight was really well done. So, here and there, the action was pretty good, especially compared to all the other Star Wars shows.
Yeah, great points. Citrus George, what do you got?
Yeah, I have to actually echo these guys. I think that the music was phenomenal. I actually think the music, the score was actually better than the actual show at times. Because the music kind of carried it. If you take the music out of it, it builds up that anticipation. It moves the story along. Again, with OG, what he said, the casting, I think it's more difficult because they have to find actors that have to portray an animated character. It's so easier to find an actor and then turn them animated. But when you go the other route, you have to find someone that can interconnect with that character, that personality, that look. And that's more challenging. And I feel like the casting direction towards that, they hit the characters hit the nail on the head. Some of the fighting sequences I enjoyed. Ahsoka and Balin, Ahsoka and Anakin, Ahsoka and the Stormtroopers. No, I'm sorry. That was a little bit cringy to kind of watch. It just felt like it was over choreographed. And as I said, my biggest problem was it just felt like not just one final cliffhanger at the end of the show. It just felt like we just kept on getting a bunch of even mini cliffhangers throughout the series. It was just like a scene ended where it didn't felt complete. And actually, being that you said that, Jay, it does make sense. I think it didn't start at the editing process. I think it started at the writing. And I feel like that's where it hindered the series, unfortunately. Did it have the potential if they would have not kind of had those hiccups? Absolutely. It still has the potential. I think if they still carry the series out or possibly for a feature film, I feel like that they can do so because the series as a whole was decent. It's way better than Kenobi. So I mean, definitely better than Book of Boba Fett. I'd even say, honestly, even a little better than Mando season 3.
Yeah, that was.
But Mando season 1 and 2 so far, nothing can touch those. So yeah, I think it was decent, but Lucasfilm has to get out of that repetitive rut that they keep on putting themselves in by making the same mistakes throughout each of these series. I really wish that they can kind of notice where the mistakes are and just fix them for the next season or for the next series. But it just seems like they just keep on going back to their old habits.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you guys said. I'm going to bring up a couple more things just to close it out here. I think that a lot of times I approach these shows, and everyone who watches this show and every other show that I do will just know this about me. As a storyteller, I'm always trying to look into why things didn't work or why they did work based on the story. And this storytelling was 10 out of 10 to 2 out of 10. I don't know if there was any zeros out of 10. I'm not sure that there was here. There have been in other stuff, but maybe not here. But it was just bouncing back and forth constantly. And so some of the storytelling choices are both my favorite things about this show and my least favorite things about this show, even down to the name of this last episode. I haven't talked about this yet on any show, but the fact that they went after a Narnia name made no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, the name of the show is like a Narnia play on words.
Yeah.
Does anybody know why that?
You're right. It's called The Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even pick up on that, but you're absolutely right. That is funny, dude.
And I couldn't figure out why. Like I thought when my wife and I turned it on and we started watching it, I'm like, oh, that's like a Narnia playoff. And then we watched it and I was like, but why? Why was it? Why did they do that? Right? It was so strange. And maybe they did it by mistake and they didn't even mean to do it. But when a story is all about like the signals that you send and then the signals that you pull off, and sometimes the signals that they sent, they pulled off, and then other times they sent signals that they just seemed to go nowhere, or they surprised us with something. And so the negatives for me were moments like the reunion of Ezra and Sabine and how that was just, like you said, Evan, just lacked emotion. The reunion of Hera and there's just in the finales especially, there's just some decisions where I'm like, it was written that Ezra was going to get off the shuttle in his stormtrooper outfit, despite the fact that he had all the time in the world to change clothes. Like, why get off an Imperial ship in a stormtrooper outfit and potentially get shot? Like, just change your clothes, man. And then we would have had instead of the moment being like he takes off the helmet, they could have had him actually. You have the smoke come out, the landing thing comes down, the landing ramp comes down, the smoke comes out, and then we hear this voice from inside go, "Hey, can you not shoot me, Hera?" And then he comes out, and then they run and hug, right? Like, I mean, you could have had that moment. We talked about the moment you could have had between Ezra and Sabine. Those moments, to me, I just wish that they would have been powerful and they were like whimpers instead of being powerful.
I'm glad you brought that up because two things I want to add to that.
Yeah.
One, when he pulls the stormtrooper, obviously to put on the suit, right. I wanted to see the journey of him getting to the point of meeting back up with Hera. There it goes again with that cut and paste. It's like he's pulling the stormtrooper, and then he just magically appears in front of Hera, and it's like, okay, well, where's the storyline that got him to that point? And then also when the droid approaches him, I would have loved for him to come down to the droid's level, rather than just kind of stand there and just put his hand on him and whatever. I would have loved to see him kneel down to kind of have almost like that eye-to-eye connection. So it was like you feel, as you said, Jay, that moment, and it just felt like there was no moments in these, almost like awkwardness. It was like
it was awkward.
There was awkward moments. I feel like, Jay, that moment, you're right. When he comes down out of the ship with the stormtrooper outfit, I feel like the writers were like, okay, this will be like a fake out or something. Like, oh, did he make it or not? Like, this would be a big moment, and then the reveal. You know, it's like we know that's who it is. Like, so it just felt totally flat. You know.
Totally flat. And then there were other things in the finale that did the same thing. Literally, the thing that Thrawn tells Morgan to do is, do not let any Jedi get near my spaceship. She walks into that room and lets Sabine and Ezra walk right around her. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you failed. Mission failed. Like, I don't know what's going on. It was just little things like that. You guys already talked about the stormtroopers. The stormtroopers weren't even trying to hide behind stuff. Now we know that they were going to raise from the dead, and they probably knew that, so I'll give them a pass there. It was just, there's a lot of stuff in there. Another thing that I thought was, when we talk about arcs and how the season went, and we talk about cliffhangers, another thing that really bothered me was some of the first two people that we saw in this entire series were Baylan and Shin, because they got onto that rebel thing and they killed a bunch of rebels on that ship to take Morgan out. And yet that sets them up as having something really important and powerful to do, and we don't get there. And so we're just left with it being like, well, I guess I'll get to it later. It's just a weird way to set it up, right? Like from a storytelling perspective, you really can't do that. You've got to complete something with them.
Right.
Nothing was completed with them.
I was, when I first saw them in the first episode, I was like, these are some interesting characters. They don't have fully red lightsabers. There's something beneath them. They're not fully dark-sided, but they're killing a lot of people. It's like they're mercenaries. They want to work with Thrawn, but then episode 5 or 6, we learn that Thrawn really doesn't really care for Baylan and Shin. He doesn't care.
Right.
He's like, I just need to get out of here. Baylan and Shin stay. Doesn't mind me. So I'm like, okay, does Baylan and Shin know that they can't really trust Thrawn? Baylan maybe knows that, but he's not voicing anything, so I can't really tell. And then Baylan, like, hey, Shin, I want you to be something stronger. Don't be like a Boken Jedi. I created you something more powerful. Doesn't really elaborate on that. Shin doesn't really comment on that. So I'm just like, these are characters you introduced, like you said, Jay, in scene 1. So I think I'm meant to care about them. I'm meant to theorize and discuss what their arcs could be. But by the end, it's non-existent.
Yeah.
Especially for Shin. Shin gets the real brunt of it all because it's like at least Baylan gets some really, like you said, philosophical lines, philosophical thematic elements. Shin, unfortunately, she gets told what to do a lot of the time.
Yep.
She gets some cool fight sequences, but overall, it's not even half baked. It's not. It's still raw. And I'm just in there. I'm shocked. And I think the more we've talked about it now, I think Filoni, honestly, was more excited for what he can do in the season 2 than a season 1. I think a lot of stuff in season 2 appeals to Filoni more. We're back with the Mortis gods. Filoni's known for like creating that iconic 3-episode arc in the Clone Wars about the Mortis gods. He even brought it back for Rebels. I think that's where his interests align. Whereas like Baylan can do some Mortis god stuff. Ahsoka sees Morai on the cliff, so she's like, okay, there's some mythological Star Wars stuff, some cosmic force stuff that we all love in the season 2. But season 1, he has to get through the Thrawn stuff. Oh, so Thrawn's back. He has to get through the Ezra stuff. So Ezra's back.
Yes.
And then he cuts through all these things that he has to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he's like, now I can finally dive in for season 2. While we're as an audience is left just very, well, if you're just doing that, then what do we just sit through? So it's just like, it makes us feel very unfulfilled overall.
That's such a brilliant way of saying
then
it.
He should have just went right to Ahsoka season 2. Don't even give us a season 1.
Yes, exactly.
Honestly, if this show starts at like episode 4, where it's just like, okay, we're close to finding the map. There's these 2 antagonists, Shin and Baylan. We get to Peridia quicker, not halfway through the season. Then I think he could have done his interesting stuff. But,
season 1 could have been a scroll. Yeah. So let me pull us out. Let me pull us out of.
Really quick. Speaking of scroll, I hope in season 2 that we get the traditional intro, like a Star Wars, like where it's like it's panned like upward, and then it just goes. Like, don't give me that like beginning end credits bullshit. Like I no. Like if I want something with Star Wars, give it to me like Star Wars.
It's got to be like Star Wars. I'll be positive for a minute here because there's some stuff that I really loved. Episode 4 is a masterclass in storytelling. The stakes are so high. What Ahsoka thinks she needs to do, what Baylan thinks he needs to do, what Morgan thinks she needs to do, what Shin is up to, all of that stuff was really, really, really cool. I loved all of episode 4. It was perfectly executed. The battle was phenomenal. Shout out to Peter Ramsey who directed that episode and just directed the hell out of it. It was amazing. So I loved episode 4 and everything that happened and how it happened. And then the 10-minute sequence we get with Anakin and Ahsoka, I thought was phenomenal. It brought up a lot of questions it didn't answer, but it was very meaningful to the character of Ahsoka. And that's what it needed to be. It needed to be meaningful to her, and it was meaningful to her. And we saw that meaning, and then we got to also see Anakin, which everybody loves Anakin. So that was phenomenal. And like you said, OG, Hayden Christensen in his early 40s is the best Anakin that's ever been on screen. Right?
Which no degrade off of Hayden Christensen. I love him as Anakin. The only thing was a little bit cringy was actually at the end where he was smiling at Ahsoka. Just the smile that they had him do just seemed a bit awkward. Like it didn't have like that complete like, you know, like I'm proud of you sort of moment. It almost like he had like a I'm squatting and relieving myself kind of facial expression. Like I don't know, like it just seemed like very very awkward. Like like I would have had him do like a different kind of facial expression, like with the smile. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Like if I was the director, like if I was directing him and I got that smile, oh no, we're doing another take.
I think it's interesting because I think what would have worked really well there would have been a conversation, actually.
Oh,
so I get what they were going for because it was sort of a Return of the Jedi type of an ending where it's like the Force ghosts are like, you did what you needed to do, kid. Good job, you know? Yeah, yeah exactly. But I think what would have maybe been better there is to reiterate kind of what her lesson learned was and how, and he could have said basically like, you know, you did better than I could have done in your position, and you did better than I did, right? Or something along those lines, a conversation to expose what the emotions were, as opposed to a smile, I think may have worked. Now, usually I'm a fan of showing, not telling, but in this case, I can see your argument, George, is like everything hangs on that one little moment, and if you don't nail that moment, then does it even make sense? And since we haven't had some of those other conversations to see how Ahsoka's feeling, we're missing some of that stuff, and it's just in facial expressions and things like that.
It was very on brand for the show for him to say nothing. I'll just say that.
Yeah, exactly.
No conversation.
Even in Kenobi, I don't love a lot of the finale elements in Kenobi. Doesn't Qui-Gon say something to Kenobi? Like, don't they have a small conversation, at least something?
Yeah, he did say something to him.
Okay,
so
I have a question for you fellas. Now, also with these series, they have different people directing different episodes. Could that also play into the hindrance of why the shows kind of have an up and down type of roller coaster thing? Because if you actually look at the sequels, that's what actually happened with JJ and Johnson, because like they had different outlooks on where they wanted the series to go, and that's where it kind of fell flat in some departments. So when you take a series and you have an 8-part series, and then you're going to have a director direct episode 1, and then you have somebody different do episode 2, but then you're going to go back to the director who directed episode 1 to go to episode 3. Each director is going to have a different viewpoint, a different vision, a different style. Could that potentially kind of hinder the storytelling as some mistakes that Lucasfilm makes?
It could, but maybe you want to go ahead, OG?
Well, I was just saying, no, it could. You need someone with overseeing the whole thing with a really strong vision to kind of bring it all together. And if there's any cracks in that, then you're gonna have problems. That's basically what I was gonna say.
Yeah, what I was gonna say was similar to that, except that normally in television, the shows are directed by different people all the time. They have a team of directors that they go through and they interact and direct different episodes. So that's very common in TV because it's such a heavy lift, right? What is common in TV, though, is that you have a showrunner, and the showrunner is actually sort of above all of those characters and is watching them. It's kind of like a Kevin Feige role in what we would see in MCU, right? So normally there's a showrunner that is actually the one that works with the directors to tell them this is where we need to get to, this is what we need to do. So that would have squarely fell into Filoni's realm of responsibility. So that's what I would say is like
now I do understand that would work out for like a regular television series, like when you have like 24 episodes, 30 episodes to a season. But when you have like an 8-parter, I would still think that even if you were to have like the group of directors, like when you kind of already have it set that this director is going to direct this episode, they all should kind of have like a sit down, and they all should have kind of like a cohesive understanding of where the series is going to go or where the season's going to go. Because I feel like when you have a director that would then, that's like if I come in and I direct episode 1 and it's like, okay, this is going to be a slam banger. I know what I want to do with my episode. And then you have somebody else coming in for episode 2 and it just completely hindered my episode 1. I'm like, you bastard. It's like
I just want to see an episode of Star Wars directed by George. I think that'd be fantastic.
That'd be interesting. I think so. I think Kenobi, was fully directed by Deborah Chow.
I think you're right. I think it was.
And I don't think that was a successful show, even though I do love Deborah Chow. She's a great director. It just didn't work out for her in Kenobi, in my opinion. But yeah, I think I would still put a lot of the blame on Filoni than these other directors. So I think in television, there's not a lot of control that directors actually have. It mostly comes down to the writing. It's not like, for example, Rick did this episode, the finale. It's not like he could have created an entirely new conversation between Hera and Ezra. I mean, he was just doing what the script gave him, and he directed it. He has the ability to say, like, hey, I want this shot on Ezra to stay here a bit longer. And then Filoni's like, okay, cool. And then I want this shot to stay on Shin longer when she's raising the blade, like make it rise up. He can do stuff like that as a director, but I don't think has the ability to like fully change the course of the scene. I always think about what Vince Gilligan talks about for people who are Breaking Bad fans. Vince Gilligan always talked about how he would craft his seasons. He would have all these conversations with writers. He had a big conversation with Ryan Johnson for doing Ozymandias. And people love Ryan for that. It's great direction, but Ryan, he admits, he's like, I didn't have a lot of control over like how that episode was written. It was all Vince. I just directed the hell out of it, right? Yeah. Like, he didn't say that, but like that's what he did. So like he has the ability to like linger on certain scenes of Skylar and Hank and all these other characters, but he can't really change the course of the episode. So I think that's what a lot of these shows need. Like, I think that it needs a better, as we all said here, a better script. I think that's what it comes down to. I think the directors did what they could. But I think Filoni just needed a better, more depth with the scenes here overall. Yeah.
Maybe they should get the Breaking Bad guy because that was a great show. I was addicted to that show.
It's one of my favorite shows of all time. It's incredible. It's perfect.
And so is Better Call Saul, which is amazing as well.
Oh, love that show.
So Andor is that quality, right? Like Andor is that level of quality of show, and that's why I love Andor so much.
So we know Lucasfilm, they love Andor. And Andor's getting a season 2. They know what to do right with their Star Wars shows, with their Disney shows in general. It's very weird how they can't replicate it in these Mandoverse shows, whether it's Boba, Kenobi, Mando itself, or Ahsoka. It's like, what went right. Talk to I'm blanking his name. Who
Tony Gilroy.
Tony Gilroy. Yeah. Talk to Tony. And Tony's not even a big Star Wars fan. That's what makes him so good. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a crap about Star Wars. It's like he was like, okay, you want me to create a good show, a good spy show? Sure, I'll do it. And he created the heck out of it. So it's like because like as Jay said, he went with what a TV show is supposed to be. Right. And even though he had extra episodes, I think he had 12 episodes for Andor. He had a little bit more than these other shows for some reason. He probably asked for more episodes because he's like, I can't do 8 episodes. Like I need 12. What do you mean?
That's like when things are like so like precise down to like a formula, like it's so analytical that you have to like go down, like it has to be a certain way, a certain this way. It's like just kind of have fun with it. Let it roll off. Because sometimes like when you're too structured, then it shows in the characters, it shows in the story, and it's like you lose that motion. So it's like sometimes you do have to have a good, healthy, strong script. You do have to have strong, healthy actors, but it's like sometimes when you're just like too gung-ho of like, okay, we have to make sure like this is gonna have to be this. It's like, no, just go along with it. Because honestly, it shows in the way that how things are created. And it's like when you make something, it's like when they say cook with love. Like when you put your love into cooking, you have a good final feast, but it's like if you're cooking angry or you're cooking like down to the slightest recipe, it comes out looking like shit. It's like so.
Spoken like a true Italian. You cook with love.
Well, you also to use that, keep using that metaphor, which I actually think is a pretty good one. You have to be an expert of experts to cook without a recipe. So you do need the structure of a recipe to get you to the end result. You still cook with love. So I think what Lucasfilm has acknowledged is we don't have expert recipes for this. We do movies. We don't do TV shows, right? So I think actually a little bit more structure could be helpful in this case. Not that they shouldn't be cooking with love, they should be, but sometimes I think that they need a little extra structure in these episodes, because I think that, like, you look at it in episode 3, which I thought was probably the weakest episode. Episode 8's the most disappointing to me, but episode 3 is the weakest. It was only like 35 minutes, right? Like, if it had structure and said, well, you need to get here, then you need to get here, then you need to get here, I feel like it would have been better off. But it didn't seem to have any structure whatsoever. And I think it suffered from that to a degree.
See, as like individual, yeah, I do agree with you. As a whole, I feel like it's the opposite way, because it's like because they're saying, okay, we got to get strategic. It's like, okay, we got to give them a whole bunch of cliffhangers, and it's like we got to show them the unknown without actually telling them. And it's like, and then we're the ones creating the story. It's like, well, fine, if you want me to create the story, then bitch, let me go on set. I'll write you something and direct something, and I'll give it to you.
So funny.
I want to see that happen. I want to see you say that to Filoni. That would be full George balls to the wall. I love it.
I to see that at the very end, that in the blue writing, the directed by George Falcione. That'd be great.
That's ideal. That's ideal. Well, we would love to hear your thoughts about Ahsoka as well. Leave them down in the comments below. In the meantime, follow everybody on this panel. Evan, tell the folks where you're from again and what you're up to, and what are some of the upcoming shows you're talking about.
I'm doing a lot. So follow me on Twitter for Harris EV9. I've been tweeting about, I'm a huge reality TV person. So if you follow me, you're going to get a lot of like Big Brother. I love Big Brother, Survivor, Amazing Race. I watch all those shows. But also I'm doing a lot of podcasts. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about Loki, season 2, episode 1, which I have not watched yet. Watching that right after this episode, after we're done here. We're talking about Loki, and we're talking about the movies we watched in August and September. You can find that on Nathan Rojas's channel in the description below. But then on Sunday, we do a lot of commentaries. So we're going to do a commentary for The Goonies, which I've never seen before. So my first time watching Goonies.
Cool.
So then next week, again, we're going to be doing weekly podcasts about Loki and other Halloween commentaries lining up. Also, I have another channel called Where Heartbreak Feels Good, where I'm a guest host. We talk about the movies that we watched in a certain month. Just last week, we talked about the movies we watched in August and September. And then coming up, we're going to do some Oscar predictions for the month of October, because I'm a huge Oscar fan, and I cannot wait to talk about what the Oscar season's looking like in 2023. So again, just follow me for Harris EV9 for all my upcoming podcasts and stuff.
I just followed you as you were talking about that. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta listen to this. I'm really curious to hear what you think of Loki too, because I watched it last night and I had some strong feelings. I almost don't want to tell you what I thought, because
okay.
Because I want you to just react to it. But yeah, because I was going into it without hearing anybody's opinions on it really at all. And I'll just say this, I was surprised. Citrus George, tell the folks where they can find you and what you're up to.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also check out the podcast I'm part of called A Walk with Walt. And of course, you'll find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And pretty soon I'll be on the set directing the 8-part series of Ahsoka season 2. And
that's awesome. That's great.
No. So yeah, we got a lot of shows in the pipeline for Orange Grove 55. Some Citrus Corners. I have kind of things like in thought right now, but gonna have them come out soon. More Orange Nerd, more of the classic Orange Grove 55 shows. I'm really looking forward to the next Story Geeks, where we dive into the theory of Pixar, and so it's gonna be great. And then just hearing the news around the world of Disney, as more news comes out, it'll be showcased on the channel. So looking forward to it.
Now Evan isn't you're not a huge theme park person, right, Evan? Mostly So you're probably wondering, why is everything on this guy's show orange related, right? Reason for that, because you're probably what is going on here with the citrus and this, that, and the other? It's because
he likes the tartness.
Yeah, I love oranges, man. I just love them. I got a whole closet full of them. No. No, it started off mostly just talking theme parks, and so Disneyland is my home park, and I love Disneyland so much. And it was built on an orange grove in Anaheim, and then 55 is the year it opened. So just to give a little context, because you're probably thinking like, oh my god, this is crazy.
And I love that. I love the look on his face. He's like, I don't give a shit.
No. I have to check some of your podcasts out. Actually, I'm a huge Pixar fan, so I can't wait to watch your Pixar episode. I love Pixar movies. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, speaking of OG 55, the Grand Admiral of the channel, where can people find you, OG?
You can find me on X at Orange Grove 55. You can find me on Instagram, Orange Grove 55. You can find me right here on YouTube, Orange Grove 55, where I'm joined by these fine gentlemen all the time talking movies, studio stuff. We even dive into the corporate stuff, like when they have those shareholder earnings calls with Disney, we get into that. A lot of theme park stuff, of course. Just having fun with a bunch of, nerds just talking about nerdy stuff. It's a good time. So
Perfect.
Like and subscribe if you haven't already.
Yeah, well, everybody knows. Most of you guys know me by now. Jay Sherer. You can follow me on X at Jay Sherer. And I will be directing my first short film. I've directed some other audio projects before, but I will be directing my first short film in November. So I might have George on my set telling me I needed to figure out how to do it correctly. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But you can follow me over on How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. I've got a bunch of information about storytelling. I do some analyses of storytelling, and you can always find me here on the Orange Grove 55 network. And if you're wondering how I thought about some of the other Ahsoka shows, in addition to what we talk about here on OG 55, huge shout out to Nerd Soul, my good buddy Michael. He's been having me on every week to talk about Ahsoka as well, and it has been an absolute joy. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for watching through this series. Catch us on the next episode where we're talking about Pixar. In the meantime, leave your comments down below on what you thought about Ahsoka, all of the season, but even especially episode 8. And we will see you on the next episode.